have an interesting personal challenge for this speaking engagement in that I broke my toe on Friday night. And so I'm still a novice at limping around, so you may have to bear with me if there's a little bit of awkwardness here. But we're going to take a quick tour of the changed landscape of careers. And what I'm going to share with you is work that began at Deloitte when I was leading a talent strategy and innovation team with my co-author, Kathy Banco, who's still at Deloitte as their vice chairman and who was chief talent officer. And so the work that we talk about in the book, the ideas we've cultivated around careers, really came out of our own practical experience in trying to become an employer of choice. Now, another interesting fact is actually the origins of a lot of things that propelled us on our change journey actually began in our women's initiative at Deloitte. Deloitte had actually had a women's initiative since 1982, and they were doing a strategy refresh and really trying to figure out what could take them to the next level of achievement. And they knew that what got them there, what had gained all the progress for women that they had already made, would not get them to the next level. And actually, this is a theme I've seen in a lot of companies I work with, that your diversity initiative can often really be a fruitful place to cultivate employer of choice practices because you're facing a lot of really tough constraints. And talk to any innovation expert, and constraints are what propel creativity, because you have to come up with a new and different way to do it. So it's been a very interesting journey, and I won't take you through all the steps along the way. That would take longer than we have. And of course, I did recognize when Ed shared with me the agenda that I was the last speaker before you and lunch and a bio break. And so in order to keep things a little bit lively, I do have a quick video to give you a little bit of entertainment before we launch into our topic.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Son, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is the lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello, Captain? I think he's gone. Fair enough.
Now, of course, I'm glad you enjoyed that. It woke the room up a little. But I am a consummate multitasker, and so I did have another agenda as well. And that is that obviously the captain had a fixed view of reality. He understood the terrain to be one thing. And in fact, his view was completely wrong. And so that set him on a collision course. And the same principle is going to apply when we look at careers. The reality of careers, the terrain of careers has changed a great deal. And if we don't understand that change, we can't navigate effectively. So that's what we're going to talk about first, is what is the changed reality around careers. Then we're going to take a look at organizations and what are some best practices that let you respond to this changed reality. And I think we're just at the beginning of all the creative things companies can invent to really respond to and even take advantage of the change that has gone on. So hopefully these will provide inspiration for your own invention. And then we're going to touch very briefly as well on what are the implications for individuals. Because your individual employees are going to have to start to learn some different ways to think about their own development in the context of this changed landscape. So we'll hopefully go through this pretty quickly and keep it moving. But one of the things we found very early on in the work that began at Deloitte is that in order to talk about this changed landscape, we needed some language so that we can engage with our leadership, so that we can name the old reality and understand the new reality. And so the words that we happened to pick were that the corporate ladder has moved to the corporate lattice. And corporate ladder is the word that we use to mean the industrial age paradigm, right? The paradigm that came out of sort of many scholars would consider, say, the 1950s to be sort of the heyday of the industrial age corporation. And when you have a lot of the talent practices that are still with us today being invented, and at that point you had a lot of corporate leadership that had military experience and leadership in World War II, right? And they'd come back from the war and had risen in their organizations. And so we see, not surprisingly, very top-down and hierarchical. Of course, the work we're trying to get done is very mechanical and repetitive, which we know from research, pay for performance works for very well. Work is very 9 to 5 in the office. We don't have a lot of creative kinds of technology options. Career and life are strictly separated. Leave your life at the door when you walk into work, right? So I'm going to use the word corporate ladder to describe that whole paradigm. And a lot of other management thinkers use other terms. If you've read Gary Hamel's work, he uses management 1.0 to management 2.0. I'm not a terminology purist, but I think it helps to have some language to think about the shift. Now, the word corporate lattice, the reason we picked lattice, partly we thought of sort of a garden lattice, a platform for organic growth, right? Because we're thinking about the development of people. And if you think of it, a lattice in a garden, it's a very regular structure, so there is a structure, but it allows plants to grow along whatever their individual trajectory is. But we also picked lattice because it turns out, I'm actually married to a mathematician, and it turns out lattice is actually a mathematical construct. So in a lattice, every point can connect to every other point, like a high-speed network. It allows movement in any direction, and it's infinitely scalable. And so we use the word corporate lattice to describe the new paradigm around careers, where people don't just move up or out, but where you can move in multiple directions, where you can build adaptability and versatility, where you can integrate career with life. And it's really built around this idea of flatter and more networked organizations. So that's just the terminology that I'm going to be using and that we found really helped to bring our leaders on this journey with us. Now, let's talk about what's driving this change and where is it coming from so you can really see that it is, in fact, our new reality. And a lot of these individual trends are going to be quite familiar to you. In fact, a lot of the speakers this morning have mentioned Gen Y or the changes that technology has brought to our workplace. But what I particularly want to focus you on is the convergence of those trends, of how a whole bunch of things are all happening at the same time. And of course, convergence is the pattern that you see when big shifts and changes occur. When different kinds of technologies converge together, we really see a breakthrough and a step forward. As an undergraduate, I was a government major, and if you look at social revolutions, major upheavals where the whole paradigm for government shifts, it's multiple trends, multiple causalities that collide at the same time that's going to get you that big change. So, and I think of these trends in two big groups, how the workforce has changed and how the workplace has changed, and what's happening when those come together. So if we take a quick tour through the landscape of the workforce, one of the less talked about trends are the changes in family structure. So if you go back to 1950 and you look at the typical family, 63% of families had what economists consider, and it's their terminology, not ours, but economists consider a traditional family structure. And that is that the dad went off to work and mom stayed at home. Any idea what that number is today? What? 32. So the actual number today is 17%. 83% of us are non-traditional. Huge growth in dual career couples, huge growth in single head of household. But that traditional family structure is no longer in play for the majority of us, right? And that matters to the career model because the career model was built on the assumption that the person at work really didn't have any obligations or responsibilities on the home front. Now, of course, part of what is driving that big shift is the massive entrance of women into the workforce. We saw women coming into the workforce, particularly in the 70s and 80s in droves. And women are now close to half of the American workforce. They're over 50% of the managers and professionals, so they're disproportionately represented at those levels, and that's particularly because of their very high levels of educational achievement. About 60% of undergraduate and master's degrees are going to women, and have been, over half have been going to women for 2 decades now. So the lion's share of that educated workforce that you as employer of choice are competing for is a female workforce. And yet, the majority of women do not have a traditional career. On average, the typical woman, the 50th percentile, is going to take a 2-year career break to deal with family or other kinds of situations. But those same trends have affected men too. So men, for example, today experience more work-life in dual career couples. The men experience more work-life stress than the women. And they're not just like a little higher, they're like a third higher. So 45% of the women in dual career couples report work life, 60% or 59% of the men. So almost a third higher for the men than the women. And we've talked a little bit about the generational differences, so Gen Y, and they're out there job hopping quite a bit, but they're not doing it because they want to, they're doing it because they can't find an employer who's giving them the learning and growth and skills they know they need to compete in the market. So profound, and we could go on for quite a while, but profound changes in the workforce. Now let's look over at the workplace, right? Technology has changed things, so more options for when and where people work. Victor at Medtronic shared some really nice stories of how you can take advantage of those technologies to change how work actually happens in the organization. And the organizational structure itself has shifted. Organizations today are on average 25% flatter than they used to be. So if you look at GE at the start of the 80s, you've got 22 layers. By the time you get to the beginning of the 90s, you've got 7 layers, right? And so the career model in a flatter structure simply physically cannot be what it was when you had 22 layers. No longer works. So I think if you look at how all of these are coming together, we see that kind of no matter which door you go through, there's this really profound shift. All right, so if we understand that and we have some language to talk about it, what can we actually, as employers who want to really have a compelling work environment, what can we actually do? And at Deloitte, once we understood this shift, we took our inspiration from mass product customization. So in mass product customization, a consumer goods manufacturer, for example, can cost effectively and scalably produce a product very tailored to your personal needs. So you can order your coffee with 2 shots, non-fat, hold the foam, right? Tailored to you. Or you can listen to your tunes whenever you want to. So how could we do that in HR for careers? And we created a framework and trained all the managers and employees, 50,000 of them, in the framework and rolled it out across the organization that offers them different levers to dial their career up and down over time. So we broke the paradigm that a career has to develop in linear ways in order to be a successful one. Now, when we did this, we were able to do some measurement because we rolled it out in waves. We rolled out initially to about 10% of employees. We had a group in every single business rolled out. We were able to compare their retention rates to employees who were not yet using the framework. And overall, during that time period, top performer attrition was falling, but it fell by twice as much in the areas that used the career customization framework as it did in the business as a whole. And in fact, for those employees, we saw a 25% increase in career life satisfaction. And as we've developed more sophisticated analytical tools over time, where we can have career life questions not just in our engagement surveys, but in our exit interview surveys as well, we've been able to figure out that investing $1 in providing people challenging, interesting work that fits with their lives, produces 5 to 10x the return, depending on which of our businesses you look at, that it does to invest that same dollar in compensation. Now, you can take these same ideas and apply them in different ways in different environments. So a pharmaceutical company, for example, was redoing careers for its sales force. And in fact, in sales jobs, you often have people who are very, very good salespeople and not such good managers. So they really, in this Salesforce career redesign, wanted to provide career opportunities for people who might stay in essentially the same job for very extended periods of time. So they modeled it after an airline frequent flyer program, where you could start out as a silver level salesperson, move to gold level, and move to platinum level. And there were competency requirements and performance requirements that you had to meet to do that. It also provided, again, a way to integrate career with life. So maybe I'm at the platinum level, but I need to attend to some things on the life front. So this year, I talked to my manager, and we reached a decision that I can move to the gold level. And so I'm going to have a lower performance requirement, but also a lower compensation that's associated with being at the gold level, right? So I don't think you have to take the ideas and apply them in one way. You really customize and tailor them to your business model and business needs. Now, we actually earlier heard from John about Facebook and some places where they've embedded personal choice. When engineers show up, they go through 6 weeks of onboarding. Now they can pick where they want to work. And then after they've done a job for a while, they can pick their next role. Well, what does that mean from an individual perspective? It means we're done with the days of Big Brother in career development, right? So really, with greater personal choice comes significantly greater personal responsibility. You, as an individual, now have to take much greater ownership for your career. And so this is a philosophy or an idea we call becoming CEO of your career. You're in charge, right? And you need to navigate that career differently than you might have in the past. You've got to keep your skills marketable and relevant. The rate of knowledge in many fields is doubling every 2 years. In many cases in sciences and the technology, what somebody learns as an undergraduate in their freshman year, 75% of that is going to be outdated by the time they graduate. Right? So the bar for keeping skills current and relevant is much higher than it used to be. Need an options orientation, right? The historical framework for careers is very destination-based. And it works well in a paradigm like the corporate ladder where there are very low rates of change. I come in as an entry-level CPA. I'm targeting the CFO role. Over the next 20 years, that CFO job may not change much. Not true in today's world. I need an options orientation. I need to think about multiple destinations. I need all kinds of different directions that I can move. And then, of course, the career life elements that we've talked about, which is that it's not going to be a straight-up linear climb for the majority of people. And so there's going to be trade-offs and hard choices to make along the way. And how do we get ready to think about and make those? And so one of the things we found really had to happen as you try to change this paradigm is you really have to help the employees learn to navigate in a fundamentally different way at the same time that the organization is shifting its practices in this area. All right, so we've taken a pretty quick tour, but I think you can see when you look at the trends, not just in the workforce, but in the workplace, that that paradigm is really, really shifting. And I hope what I've done is given you some ideas for how you could get really then creative about inventing new development pathways that will really produce benefit for those employees, but also produce the kind of results you need to drive in your organization. Thank you very much.